everyone, and welcome to Step Into Your Life with Julianne Williams. Today we have a special guest, Whitney Allen, and she is someone who has had an experience very near to mine. She lost her husband at a very young age, and she is also a certified grief educator. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, what is it like to be young and lose a husband, but then how do you get through loss and build that life that you love? You are going to be amazed by Whitney. I absolutely love the content that she has. And so I found her on Instagram and reached out to her. So that's how we became acquainted. And so here we are now today recording a show together that I think both of us as certified grief educators, both of us as widows, should be a pretty interesting conversation. So right now I'm going to bring on Whitney and go through her bio, and you're going to meet her. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Or afternoon where you are, right?
Yeah, it's afternoon where I am, but thank you so much for that introduction and for having me.
So I wanted to just read your bio to the audience so that they understand the depth of, first of all, your education, which is incredible, and just the experience that you had that was so hard. And then how you have recovered from that and done such wonderful things on Instagram and in other places, but that's how I found you. So let me just read that to everyone. Whitney Lyn Allen is first and foremost mama to her sons, Jackson, who is 6, and Leo, who is 2. She practiced law as a medical malpractice defense attorney. She was on my side, as a healthcare provider for 10 years before her husband had a severe reaction to a bee sting and sustained a severe brain injury, subsequently resulting in his death. Whitney decided to turn her pain into purpose and followed her new calling to serve others who are experiencing grief and trauma and share her vulnerable and personal grief story with others. She is the author of the book about grief and loss titled Running in Trauma Stilettos, which is an Amazon bestseller. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Whitney is also a certified grief educator and provides grief coaching to those who are ready for their own transformation and growth after loss. She shares the empowering message that there is so much beauty in life, even after losing a loved one. So that is Whitney Lyn Allen with us today. Whitney, welcome again. And do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your story?
Sure. I mean, I guess I have to kind of start from the beginning. My late husband, Ryan, he was a canine officer in Montgomery County in Pennsylvania. In October 2021, we celebrated our 8-year wedding anniversary on October 12th. And then 2 days later, and I was 26 weeks pregnant at the time with a 3.5-year-old, Ryan came home from the gym and he had been stung, I believe on the way home from the gym on one of his days off. And he had a very severe reaction to a bee sting, went into anaphylaxis, which caused him to go into cardiac arrest, which then caused a very severe anoxic brain injury, which is when your brain is deprived of oxygen. And that kind of started a 6-month, hell on earth, basically, of Ryan fighting for his life, going in and out of hospitals and rehab, trying to see if he would recover in any meaningful way. And then around 5 months into that really hard journey, his doctors at rehab basically told us there's no way he's going to have a meaningful recovery. So for me, I said we would fight until it doesn't make sense anymore, and until it doesn't make sense for our family, and until it doesn't make sense for Ryan, especially. So I decided, along with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, to place Ryan on hospice, so he wouldn't have to be trapped in his body in a vegetative state, which it really felt like that was what was happening. And he died 22 days later on April 7th, 2022. And then after that, I mean, if you are someone who has been through a significant loss, like the loss of a partner or spouse, you understand how life shattering that is, no matter what way that happens. And for me, I felt like after Ryan died, I was starting my life completely over. Grief and trauma just changes you fundamentally. It changes you in every way. I don't think there's anything that it didn't touch in my life, but like my physical environment, my spiritual environment, my emotional environment, just mentally, I was a totally different place. And I could have gone back to law. I had my position available for me, and I said, you know what, life is so short. I don't love practicing law. It doesn't really make sense for me in who I am now to go back. And I really want to help people through this experience because going through it made me realize how little resources we have for people going through this type of grief and trauma and suffering this sort of tremendous loss. And people don't talk about these things. And I really wanted to be that person for other people going through a really dark time and be the light for other people because I felt really alone and I didn't want other people to feel so isolated within a similar experience. So I wrote my first book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, so people could relate in that way. And then I also became a certified grief educator through David Kessler's program. And ever since I've been helping people one-on-one work through their own grief experience. And this is kind of what I do now.
And what a big change. And what you said is so right. I mean, I look at myself, I lost my husband when I was 36. And
Mhm.
it's going to be 19 years for me this year. And
Wow.
I look at myself then and I look at myself now, and I almost don't recognize even me.
Yeah.
Not just my life of, married and 2 kids and blah, 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 but really, I don't even know if I recognize myself.
Yeah. Mhm.
You just turn into a person, and I'm that's not all bad. I would have preferred to have done that without the loss. However, to your
Yeah.
point, your bio is really finding that life that you can live in that is still happy, and you still have contentment, and you can still raise your children. What were
Mhm.
some of the things that I mean, and it's not been very long for you. I mean,
Mhm.
technically, you're still in early grief, right? I mean, if we go back
Yeah.
to our education on grief, and so you're still really in that early grief. What are the things that you have done to heal so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much that has gone into, where I am today. And for me, I feel like in grief, it's like time is so relative because it's like what you do in that time that really matters.
Mhm.
Because I have clients who are, like 10 years removed from their grief and they are, I feel like where I was in the very like beginning stages time wise,
Mhm.
because they haven't been ready to really lean into, getting themselves help, or leaning into the things that I feel like really help people within this experience. For me, I really didn't know what the heck I was doing. Like I felt like I was just on the ocean in a raft with no help. I think people can relate to that.
Mhm.
So I asked myself, like, what made me feel grounded, in control, at peace, brought me joy in my life before, because that's all I knew, right? Like my life before. And one of those really powerful things that I leaned into was exercise, like running and weights. And I just, no matter how exhausted or mentally or physically I felt, I would show up for myself every day and get a workout in because I knew that if I did that, I would be more on like a baseline and I would have more energy for my kids and I would have more patience for the world, because your patience like gets so thin in early grief. And I built this like resilience within myself through, exercise, like physically pushing myself, through going to therapy every week and really working through a lot of the things that I needed to process, like the trauma that I had been through, guilt I felt, anger I felt, a lot of the things that all of us grievers kind of tackle when we lose our person. I started writing my first book really soon after Ryan's death. And I think for me, that was so therapeutic. Like journaling, it's known to like scientifically help people process really intense emotions. So I think that really helped. And I encourage the people I work with to journal or write, because we have to get it out. You have to get out all of this energy, because that's really what emotions are. It's energy. And it's like finding out what works for you, and what brings you some sort of peace, because it's not, you're never going to get rid of all the pain. Like that's not what my work is. That's not what grief is. It's how do I manage and how do I cope when I'm feeling a certain way so it's not all consuming.
That's a really good point. I found early in my grief, and it's been a while, but with people would say things to me that were a little shocking.
Hmm.
And I think it's because, to what you said earlier, we don't know how to talk about grief in
Yeah.
the United States, probably in the world, but especially in the United States. What are some of the things? I mean, I've done some podcasts and some blogs on what to say and not to say, but looking back, what are some things that you can say to somebody that you found to be more helpful and where you didn't feel so alone? At least you felt that somebody was empathetic and really, on that same page with you, as they say.
Yeah, I think any statement that didn't try to fix, or mend, like, either my tough emotions or actually, like, the reality of the situation, at least statements are
Mhm.
something to avoid. Like, at least you had so much time with them, but it's like, then you're thinking, "Well, I wish I had, like, 40 more years with them, 50 more years with them." Like, "What do you mean?"
Yes.
It's never gonna feel like enough time, and, like, statements that start with, like, "You should do this," because, people that just don't understand what this experience is like, honestly, I don't think you should be giving advice because you just don't know what this experience is like. Um, so anything that made me feel like you weren't validating my emotions and what I am the experience, because I just wanted someone to tell me like this really sucks. Like this is
Mhm.
terrible and
Yes.
I am so sorry you're having to go through this, and like I know you probably don't even know what you need right now, but I'm here. Like I'm just here and I will be awkward and uncomfortable while you just do whatever you need to do.
And that's such a good point, is that that's what it feels like when you're trying to support somebody through grief. It feels awkward and uncomfortable because we don't know what to say, but then also we have our own feelings that we're trying to work through as well. And so you're in this cycle of, I want to help this person, but boy, it makes me feel really bad when I'm with them. However, when you're not with them, they feel even worse.
Yeah.
So I like that description. Now, you and I both had the experience of having young children when
Mhm.
we lost our spouse, and that I also think adds a dimension. For me, it added the dimension of I knew I had to get out of bed every day, at least at some point, because everybody had to eat, and that kind of got me up. On the other hand, the overwhelm and just the sadness of my not having a partner anymore, changing my whole daily routine, the sadness of my children, watching them grieve, and
Yeah.
then also thinking about, grieving the future. So, I think that losing a spouse young and with young kids is a very, um, I mean, I think it adds some layers.
Yeah.
You dealt with that.
Oh goodness. I think I don't know if there was any dealing with that. I think it's just as a mom, and my sons were like I had a newborn and a 4-year-old when Ryan died. It's you are just in survival mode and you are going throughout the motions and you feel numb and detached and dissociated and like all the things, and it's just you just have to, I feel like I heard, "Oh, you're so strong," a lot, and it was like, "No, I'm not strong at all. I'm honestly feel the weakest. I mean, maybe this looks like strength, but I'm breaking inside, but this is just I have to do this because my kids my kids need to eat and they need to go to school and they need to be taken care of and kept alive." Um, and I was keeping them alive when I didn't feel alive. Like that's what the experience was like.
Yes.
Now it's different. I feel like I've transitioned from the fight or flight survival mode. Thank goodness, because that is, a very uncomfortable season. And now I feel like I'm finally able to enjoy my kids because I can be fully present, like embodied within myself, like my body and mind is connected again, where it wasn't before in the early stages of grief. And it makes me sad because I honestly missed a lot of time, but
Mm.
you do what you can, you do the best you can, and I did the best I can with a really hard situation that I was given.
And how do you talk to your children about grief?
Yeah, well, the younger one is 2, so I don't there's no
Yeah,
really talking now.
I know that I know your little one is little, but
Yeah, but the 4-year-old, like, he was 4 when Ryan died, and he's now almost 6. You know, I went to see a child psychologist to talk to them about, how do I talk when Ryan was on hospice? How do I talk to my child, a very young child, about dying, and that his dad is going to die, and like, what are the right things to say and do, and what are the wrong things to say and do? And everything was very intuitive. I felt like I kind of knew everything, but it was nice to kind of have that backup to be like, you're doing the right thing.
Mhm.
But it's being very literal. It's, describing exactly what is happening in a very literal sense. For a 4-year-old, that looked like, daddy's going to die. You know that he's been very sick. He cannot get better. Like dying means your heart is going to stop and you're not going to be able to eat or dance or sing or talk. And then daddy's body's not going to be here anymore because it's just it's a very literal because they don't understand euphemisms. Like they don't even understand at that age, like if you believe in heaven, like they don't understand that because to them, everything is a physical place. And if daddy's in heaven, it's like, oh, I can go there.
Right.
Um, so I've been very careful with, now that he's 6, I think he is more understanding of, more things that are abstract than
Mhm,
before. But
mhm.
I think being very honest and open and vulnerable and very literal is the way to go with children.
And that's a hard conversation to have as a parent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's
I mean,
heartbreaking.
yeah, I mean, those it's brutal. You're already in pain, and then you have to tell your children, what's happening. It is very, very difficult. And I'm
Mhm.
not quite sure, like you said, if you haven't been through the experience, it's difficult to understand the toll that even that takes on you, on a person. So I
Yeah.
know for me, I'll never forget those difficult moments because I mean, they're things you never thought you'd have to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about your grief practice, what you do. You do a lot on Instagram that I think is really
Mhm.
inspiring and engaging. What are some of your, I guess, philosophies, for the lack of a better word, on
Mhm.
how you are, demonstrating that life coming out of the loss?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you ask me that question, all I can think about is being really authentic to not only your grief, but to how you decide to move forward in this, into a new life, because that's what it is after the loss of your person. I think people get stuck because they feel so much resistance from whether that's like external forces because they feel like, oh, if I do this, like I'm going to upset X, Y, and Z, or this is different than my old life. So there's a lot of fear there. But I think intuitively we always know what will bring us some joy and peace moving forward. And I think just getting in tune with your intuition and your gut again, because sometimes that can just get really messed up in grief. And grief is a liar. Like grief will tell you that, you're not worthy of this new life, and that, the things that you are doing are wrong. But you have to tell grief to like shut up, and that I'm doing, this is what I'm doing and this makes me happy and this is what feels right for me. So I would say, be authentic to yourself in this new journey.
It's true. People have a lot of judgments. I think especially
Yeah.
when you're younger, to like when should you do this? When should you do that? This is how they should raise their children. This is when they should start dating.
Hmm.
Those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of judgment to that. Um, and it's hard to move forward because we all wanted the life that we signed up for before the loss. That's what we were
Yeah.
planning on. So you're
Hmm.
grieving everything, from what's happening today to what you thought it was going to be later. So, do you have any advice for people on how they can take some steps to move towards that time where they can give up the guilt and really understand their worth? That just them being alive is
Hmm.
important. They have something to contribute without the person that they lost.
Yeah, I mean, guilt it's just one of those things that I think all of us as grievers, we understand. And, usually what's underneath the guilt is the pain of losing your person and, the reality of the loss. So your brain is really protective. So you're feeling guilt for either moving forward or because there are things that you feel like you could have done to either like stop the death or things that you feel regret about around that situation and your person dying. And it's because your brain is like, well, if I think about this, if I feel guilty, I'm not feeling pain and I'm not in the reality of my situation.
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, if it was like a client coming to me with that, I would say like write down what do you need to release? Like what are these things that you are still holding on to and feeling guilty about? Um and then like I want you to like burn them, like or throw them out. And because you really it's making a decision. Like you are making the decision to move forward, because there's no other way you can do that. Because we can keep going back to the past, we can keep living in the past, because that kind of feels safe. Because that,
Right,
even though it's terrible, it's comfortable because we already know what happened. The
right.
future is really scary. So that's why I think there's that resistance there. We don't want to move forward because that's the unknown and we have already lost control. So it's like we're trying to maintain control by living in the past. It's like so crazy what our brain does. Um, so you really have to, and there are things that happen that you can't put a bow on. Like you're never going to have closure with. So you have to kind of make that closure for yourself. And like when I say burn like these things, it's because that's just an example, but it's like a physical reminder that you are releasing this
Right.
guilt and it can be really powerful. So whatever works for you. But that would be something I would recommend to a client.
I think those are great suggestions because I do think it's sometimes we have to have that physical part of what's happening with us emotionally so that it can integrate because that's really
Yeah,
what we're trying to do, right? Um,
exactly.
so we just got through the holidays and I did some stuff on holidays and I'm sure you did too. But
Mhm.
now we have Valentine's Day approaching. And who knows when people will be watching this, but if they're watching it before Valentine's Day, it doesn't matter what holiday it is, but you know, sometimes for people, especially like you and I who have lost a spouse, Valentine's Day anniversaries can be super hard.
Yeah.
What are some strategies that you use to help people or help yourself that can help other people get through that time?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is have no expectations because usually you feel anxious and the most like griefy, I like that term.
Mhm. Me too.
You know, leading up to these big significant dates, and usually that lead up is worse because in our minds we make it worse than what it is. So like if you just kind of are like, I'm not gonna have any expectations about this day, like if I need to be in bed all day, like I'm gonna do that, like if I can do that. Or if I need to, go for a run in the morning to kind of just like ease my mind, like that's what I'm gonna do. Um, I like to think grief is like a practice and we come to it every day with whoever we are in the moment and on that day. instead of having like expectations like, oh, I'm going to be a mess on that day. I mean, honestly, you don't really know that. Do we know that? We don't know. I mean, maybe you are, and that's okay too. But
Right.
um, you have to just let yourself live more in the present and stop worrying about like what am I going to be like, when this date comes. Cuz I think that's the worst of it because a lot of my clients are like, "Oh, well that passed. It was hard, but it definitely wasn't as bad as like I made it out to be in my mind." I'm like, "Exactly."
I know. And it's funny, earlier in my grief, I found that the day after the holiday was harder. And I think it's
Yeah.
because I like got myself in this place where it's like, okay, it's the holiday. I'm going to be, this, and then the day after it's like, oh, so it's interesting how we all have this unique experience, but there's so much interwoven, obviously, that is the same because we're human
Mhm.
beings. But it is just interesting, to think about how we handle all of these new experiences after loss. And I think it's such a journey. And I find over time that I
Mhm.
handle them different as the years have gone by.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And then, I have some people be like, well, I wonder what next year's going to be like. And I'm like, it's going to be completely different than this year. So again, no expectations. Just take one day at a time. Like,
That's right.
because I think one of the problems grievers have is we either live in the past or the future. We're not in the present. And if we're more present, we have less anxiety because we're just in the moment and we're not being overwhelmed by things that have happened or things that we like think are going to happen, and then we won't like catastrophize about everything.
And that's such a great point because we do, I think when we're grieving, spend our time there. And I think at least for me, when I was grieving, I think it felt, like you said, safer to be in one or the other.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't sure if I can handle my present, maybe whatever it
Yeah.
was that my brain was protecting me from. However, if you think about the future too much, especially when you're grieving, it looks so overwhelming that you will ever
Yeah.
be able to be anything different than you are right now.
Yeah. Exactly.
So,
Hmm.
so just real quick, I love the title of your book. Do you want to tell us a little
Thank
bit
you.
about your book?
Sure. So my book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, it's a memoir about, well, first, my love story with my late husband Ryan, and then it's basically what happened from the time of his accident until he died, and then my life in the very aftermath of his death. So it really gives a glimpse into a really dark time, and I wanted people to really feel seen in their grief and trauma, like whatever that looked like for them. I think people can resonate with the experience and the emotions that, really can surprise you when you're going through something so traumatic. And I didn't want people to feel alone. So that's really what my book is about. My first book is so people don't feel alone in a really hard experience. And my second book, which is not out, and I cannot share the title, but it will be out in the future, will be more of a, this is what I did to kind of create a beautiful life again, and these are some of the things that you can do to help with that.
Oh, I can't wait for that to come out.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
It's it's a lot of work to write a book, and it
It
takes
is. Yeah.
it takes a lot out of you. I know myself from authoring, but I also, to your point at the beginning, that journaling, but that writing, it
Mhm.
really can be so healing. It can also be very validating because when you write this book about what have you done to find a path forward into a
Mhm.
life that looks really content and happy, you get to also be proud of yourself to really look at
Yeah.
the progress that you have made that it's not been easy because
No.
it's hard. It's hard work.
Mhm. It is. It really is.
Yeah. So, Whitney, how can people find your book? How can they find you if they want grief educating, coaching, or and whatnot?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media pretty much. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, at Whitney Lyn Allen, Lyn, just one N, and my last name is spelled Allen. And then you can also go to my website, which is whitneylynallen.com. And that if you are interested in getting one-on-one grief support, you can fill out an application. I'll get back to you to schedule a consult. So basically, those are the main places. And then you can get my book on Amazon.
Wonderful. Now, the last question of the show is always the same one, which is, Whitney, what did you do to step into your life?
I practiced living before I felt alive. And I think that is just like the most accurate statement about what I did, because deciding to move forward after a life-altering loss is really scary, and is sometimes you just want to be in bed all day, but you're not going to find life there. You have to get back out there and start practicing living again, even though it's going to be really uncomfortable, because eventually you are going to start finding those glimpses of joy and peace again. But you have to really fight for those moments. So that would be my advice.
Oh, that is profound, to be honest. Very profound. Just a really, really thought that really makes me think about what I can do today, even many years later, no matter what your loss is. So thank you for sharing that. And everyone,
you're so welcome.
Yeah. And everyone, I just want to thank Whitney for being with us today. I was so excited because, like I said, we are both young widows. Well, I'm not so young anymore, but when I had the experience and certified grief educators, our journey looks very interestingly similar. And so I was really interested to see how we both handled it and if there were any similarities and parallels, or if we did things completely different. And so I just am so grateful for you spending time with me today to share with the audience what it's been that you've gone through and how you've moved to a place where now you are helping other people.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, please join me for the next episode of Step Into Your Life, and let's journey together.